Hello, and welcome, friends, to a very special, my hair is all messed up, I can already see, oh my gosh, it's rough. Welcome back to a very special, level 1 adventuring stream night. It is a long-awaited night, and we'll get into why that is in just a moment. But first of all, hello and welcome to Level 1 Adventuring. I am your host and Dungeon Master, Wolfe Scott. What are you watching? You know, what is this place that you found yourself in? This temporal displacement that you have fallen into? Why, it is our Twitch stream, it is our YouTube channel, it is our many things. We're on all the socials. Primarily, we're a channel that focuses on role-playing games, both tabletop role-playing games, video games, single-player, like, solo RPGs, big group names, like, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Ailing says, don't worry, your hair is more put together than my life. I don't know about that considering the day that I've had, but we'll get to that in a second. But we do big games like D&D, we do it all. So please follow us on all platforms if you haven't already. But we also like to do some other fantasy adjacent content, right? Which brings us to tonight, where we're going to be reading through, you know, near and dear to all of us fantasy nerds, our hearts. We're going to be reading through The Hobbit together, right? 75th anniversary cover. Beautiful. We love it. Let's see. What did I not say? Yeah, follow us on all the things, including the YouTube. That's where all of our previous episodes, including the last read-through, will be housed. So if you want to, you know, listen along and get the first 3 chapters, you can totally do that. Join the Discords where we post about all the new videos that are coming out. We chat. We're going to play some games together there very shortly, so that'll be very fun. Shout out to StreamLabs and StreamSpell, who gave us all of our cool video effects that you've seen making the stream look so pretty. And thank you to Tabletop Audio, who's providing our ambiance tonight, our little backtrack. And chat, please feel free to yell at me if the sound starts to get a little crunchy. Streamlabs, I'm sorry, not Streamlabs, Tabletop Audio sometimes does that. So we're just going to keep our eyes open for it. But with that being said, let me move over to this view here. Also, hello, welcome, Ailing, as always, good to have you. Hello, Nocturne. Also, an old friend come back again. So good to see you. Slightly spelled wrong, but it's still okay. Yeah, I always hate when I accidentally, like, I've definitely had to nuke a few old accounts that, like, I was like, this isn't what I wanted. But as long as it's close enough and you're happy with it. I've been waiting to catch a stream again on my new account. Well, then, we're glad that you're here. Hopefully, you have, all of you have prepared yourself a little cozy evening in. I myself have made some tea, of course. What is a reading session in good company if you don't have some tea? And I put it. I have a bunch of mugs that I was kind of like excited to show off. I have a couple that I'm proud of, but the one that I was initially going to go for, I didn't grab because I felt like this one is just like kind of more Hobbity. It's this like really old, like painted German tankard that I got at like at a what do you call it, garage sale, and the handle looks like a twisted vine, you know. I was like, if this doesn't scream like cozy Hobbit vibes, I don't know what does. So this is my tea. I sip to you, I drink to you, you drink to me. Hail, hail and hearty. But yeah, that's gonna be the vibe tonight. We left off many a time ago. Ailing says I drink rum. Spike your tea. That's fine. Listen, we're all adults here. Well, as far as I know, we can have a drink. Oh, I should have spiked my tea. Why? I'm saying that and I didn't even do it. I'm a fool. I'm a fool. Maybe should I do that before we start? No, I'll be good. I'm already strapped in. Maybe during a reading break. I know, I should have made myself a hot toddy. I have everything for it. I just dropped the ball. Well, you know what? I should say, I'll tell you why I'm a little rattled. I've had quite a week actually. There's just been some very nebulous sort of talk in the world around me lately about things going on in my life. But so I've been just like, my brain has been kind of running on E for the past week, and I just got back from a vacation. I'm heading into a new one, but you know, I had all this stuff happen. I had my credit card got compromised, and I had just paid off the credit card. Not but like a week ago, and I get a statement in the mail that's telling me my balance, and I'm like, this balance should be 0, right? Maybe it's like on a delay. And I look, and like, there's a whole bunch of purchases from places that are just, would be very atypical for me to shop at. Like, someone spent $600 at Supreme. I don't know if you've seen my ensemble. It's not Supreme. So I had to call the credit card company to like refute those charges. Whoa! 20th got hit by some scammers as well? No way. Maybe it's like making its rounds. Everybody increase your cybersecurity. Yeah, so I had to like call the company and like issue a new card and all that stuff, and then I got the new card in the mail, tried to activate it, but then they told me that like the information that I had was insufficient, so I had to call their customer service line. So I called their customer service line, but they're not open on Wednesdays, which is such a random day to not be open on. So I was like, that's a bummer, because I really have to get all this done before my next trip. Hopefully tomorrow will be fine. But then, to put the icing on the proverbial cake. I don't even know if I'm using that expression right in this moment, in this instance, but you know, it's fun to say. I had to get new contacts. I shouldn't say had to. I should get new contacts because I only had one pair left, and I'm just like juggling them, right? Like trying to make them last as long as I can. So I ordered new contacts. They got delivered to the eye care place, and this is the first time that I've been to this eye care place since I like moved into my new neighborhood. So when I got the exam for my prescription, it was the first time I'd ever been there. And it's not too far away. It's like, you know, maybe a 30-minute walk. It's beautiful out lately. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So I got the call. They were ready to get picked up a couple days ago, and today was like the first day that I had to go and do that. So I'm trying to find the address for this place, right? And it's just like I had booked the appointment through like a insurance website, like through my job, so I didn't have like any emails, you know, about it, and like the texts that they were sending me didn't have like any address information. So I'm like, there's got to be like some place that I had this address in, and it was in my it was like an automatic, you know, ad from like Google Calendar or something. So I was like, oh great. And I look online at what their times are for the day, and they're like, open till 7. And I said, wonderful. Loki says, this is already making me stressed. Don't worry, we'll get into the chill moment in a second, but I feel like I just have to get this off my chest, you know? It's just been such a time. And so they're like, close at 7, great. I can like walk there, get the stuff, come back, and get everything, you know, ready to go for stream, and like plenty of time. And so I'm walking there, and I'm like remembering the street, but I'm like, I feel like I went a little bit too far over it. Like that, I feel like I'm going past where I went to the first time. And so like I look at the address again, like, you know, then Google shows you like a little picture of the street view, and it like wasn't the same. It was near, but it wasn't the same. So then I had to like refine the address, and I was like, oh, so I walked maybe like 10 minutes past it. And I'm like, not the worst thing. 10 minutes out of my day is fine. It's annoying, you know, I could have saved some time, but like, it's fine. It's a nice day. I turn around and I walk to the new place, and their lights are pitch black. And I walk, like the first door opens, like I can get into the building, but their office lights are all dark. And so I'm like, what? Like, I thought I was in time. And so I look at the office, like, you know, times posted on the window, and they're open till 7 p.m. only on one day which is Thursday, I think. And obviously today is not Thursday. So even though I was there on time for some days, I was not there on time for this day. Google had betrayed me. And so I had to walk back, dejected, no contacts. Very, 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 very stressed. But it's fine, because tomorrow I'm going to call the credit card company. I'm going to walk again and get the contacts, and everything will be fine. It's just like an hour of my life, an hour plus, that I'll never get back. You know? Happens to the best of us, I suppose. But that was my day. Kind of a bummer, but you know, it's fine. Now I just have to worry about paying for it all. Isn't that fun? Okay, so now that we are done being stressed, we are going to pick up chapter 4. I know my Roman numerals. At least I think I know my Roman numerals. Why is my keyboard? My keyboard is fighting me. Let's put it there. Chapter 4. On my book, this is going to be page 52. I don't know if you might have a different version, you know, different page numbers, but chapter 4 should be about where we're at. Gonna put a little cough drop in. I should also say that I will be applying some voices, some affectations, you know, but don't, if you're familiar with some of how the actors sounded in the movies, I'm not trying to do them. Like, I'm sure, like, some of them will sound incidentally like that because I love the movies and everything, but it's not, we're not doing impressions. We're just we're telling stories, and we're having fun. So anyway, without further ado, I wonder if I can, like, hold this in such a way that it's, like, still slightly visible, you know, for the aesthetic of it. Oh, Vinny says I love you as much as you love the movies. Vinny, that's impossible because I love you more than anything, you fool. Thank you, Vinny, for joining the stream tonight. Chapter 4. Overhill and Underhill. There were many paths that led into those mountains, and many passes over them. But most of the paths were cheats and deceptions, and led nowhere or to bad ends. And most of the passes were infested by evil things and dreadful dangers. The dwarves in the Hobbit, helped by the wise advice of Elrond and the knowledge and memory of Gandalf, took the right road to the right pass. Long days after they had climbed out of the valley and left the last homely house miles behind, they were still going up and up and up. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and a long. Now they could look back over the lands they had left, laid out behind them far below. Far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint, Bilbo knew there lay his own country of safe and comfortable things, and his little hobbit hole. He shivered. It was getting bitter cold up here, and the wind came shrill among the rocks. Boulders, too, at times, came galloping down the mountainsides, let loose by midday sun upon the snow, and passed along them, which was lucky, or over their heads, which was alarming. The nights were comfortless and chill, and they did not dare to sing or to talk too loud, for the echoes were uncanny, and the silence seemed to dislike being broken. Thank you so much for the follow, LB Adventures. I forgot that I had the sound set to like a rocking guitar, so that's going to happen every once in a while as we're listening. But thank you so much for the follow. Oh, Junchi, hi. Pleasure for you to be here. So many nice friends in the chat. I'll go back a little bit. And the silence seemed to dislike being broken, except by the noise of water and the wail of wind and the crack of stone.
The summer's getting on down below, thought Bilbo. As there was a microphone in my way, thought Bilbo. And haymaking is going on and picnics. They'll be harvesting and blackberrying before we even begin to go down to the other side at this rate. And the others were thinking equally gloomy thoughts, although when they had said goodbye to Elrond in the high hope of a midsummer morning, they had spoken gaily of the passages of the mountains, and of swift riding across the lands beyond. They had thought of coming to the secret door in the lonely mountain, perhaps that very next last moon of autumn. And perhaps it will be Durin's day, they had said.
Then he says, so many nice friends in the chat, kind of like a fellowship, you'd say. Get out of here. Nah, stay, I love you. I love those jokes.
Only Gandalf had shaken his head and said nothing. Dwarves had not passed that way for many years, but Gandalf had, and he knew how evil and danger had grown and thriven in the wild, since the dragons had driven men from the lands, and the goblins had spread in the secret after the Battle of the Mines of Moria. Even the good plans of wise wizards like Gandalf, and of good friends like Elrond, go astray sometimes when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild. And Gandalf was a wise enough wizard to know it. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. All was well, until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land and in a river valley, especially at times when two great thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are thunder and lightning in the mountains at night, when storms come up from the east and west and make war. The lightning splinters on the peaks, and rocks shiver, and great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave and hollow. And the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high up in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley at one side of them. There they were sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath a blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out into the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley the stone giants were out, and they were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them, and tossing them down into the darkness where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Psh! Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped the rain and the hail about in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all. Soon, they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants guffawing, ha 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 ha, and shouting, oh, no, see, all over the mountainsides. Now I have to remember character sounds. What was this one? This like a Jon Snow? This won't do at all, said Thorin. If we don't get blown off, or drowned, or struck by lightning, we shall be picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football. Well, if you know of anywhere better, take us there, said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy and was far from happy about the giants himself. The end of the argument was that they sent Fili and Kili to look for a better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, and being the youngest of the dwarves by some 50 years, they usually got these sort of jobs. Junji says the Gandalf is uncanny. Thank you. I mean, there's no imitation, but the voice is just so iconic. Because they were the youngest of the dwarves by some 50 years, they usually got these kind of jobs, when everybody could see that it was absolutely no use sending Bilbo. There is nothing like looking if you want to find something, Or so Thorin said to the young dwarves. You certainly usually find something, if you look, but it is not always quite the something you were after. And so it proved on this occasion. Soon Fili and Kili came crawling back, holding onto the rocks in the wind. We found a dry cave, they said. Not far around the next corner, and ponies and all could get inside.
Have you thoroughly explored it?
Said the wizard, who knew that caves up in the mountains were seldom unoccupied.
Me with my ADHD, says Loki. Is that the looking but the not finding? Or should I say the finding and the not looking? Ailing, you love this? I love this too.
Yes, yes, they said, though everybody knew they could not have been long about it. They had come back far too quick. It isn't all that big, and it does not go too far back. That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far they go back. Sometimes, or where a passage may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now Fili and Kili's news seemed good enough. So they got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling and the thunder still growing, and they had a business getting themselves and their ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and before long, they came to a big rock standing out into the path. If you stepped behind, you found a low arch in the side of the mountain. There was just room to get the ponies through with a squeeze, when they had been unpacked and unsaddled. As they passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind and the rain outside instead of all about them, and to feel safe from the giants and their rocks. But the wizard was taking no risks. He lit up his wand, as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room that seemed so long ago, if you remember, and by its light they explored the cave from end to end. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large and mysterious. It had a dry floor and some comfortable nooks. At one end, there was room for the ponies, and there they stood, mighty glad of the change, steaming and champing in their nose bags. Oin and Gloin wanted to light a fire at the door to dry their clothes, but Gandalf would not hear it. So they spread out their wet things on the floor and got dry ones out of their bundles. Then they made their blankets comfortable, got out their pipes and blew smoke rings, which Gandalf turned into different colors and set dancing up by the roof to amuse them. They talked and forgot about the storm, and discussed what each would do with his share of the treasure, when they got it, which at the moment did not seem so impossible. And so they dropped off to sleep one by one. And that was the last time that they'd use the ponies, packages, baggages, tools, and paraphernalia that they brought with them. It turned out to be a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them, after all. For somehow he could not go to sleep for a long while, and when he did sleep, he had very nasty dreams. He dreamed that a crack in the wall at the back of the cave got bigger, and opened wider and wider, and he was very afraid, but could not call out or do anything but lie and look. Then he dreamed that the floor of the cave was giving away, and he was slipping, beginning to fall down, goodness knows where to. At that, he woke up with a horrible start, and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave, and was already a wide passage. He was just in time to see the last of the ponies' tails disappearing into it. Of course, he gave a very loud yell, "What are you doing?" As loud as a yell that a hobbit can give, which was surprising given their size. Out jumped the goblins. Big goblins. Great ugly looking goblins. Lots of goblins. Before you could say rocks and blocks, there were 6 to each dwarf, at least, and 2 even for Bilbo. And they were all grabbed and carried through the crack, before you could say tinder and flint. But not Gandalf. Bilbo's yell had done that much good. It had wakened him up wide in a splintered second, and when the goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave. A smell like gunpowder, and several of them fell dead. The crack closed with a snap, and Bilbo and the dwarves were on the wrong side of it. Where was Gandalf? Of that, neither they nor the goblins had any idea, and the goblins did not wait to find out. They seized Bilbo and the dwarves and hurried them along. It was deep, dark, and deeper still, such as only goblins that have taken to the living in the heart of the mountains can see through. The passages there were crossed and tangled in all directions, but the goblins knew their way, as well as you do to the nearest post office, and they went way down and down, and it was mostly horribly stuffy. The goblins were very rough and pinched unmercifully and chuckled and laughed in their horrible stony voices. And Bilbo was more unhappy even than when the troll had picked him up by his toes. He wished again and again for his nice, bright hobbit hole. Not for the last time. Now there came a glimmer of a red light before them. The goblins began to sing or croak, keeping in time with the flap of their feet on the stone, shaking their prisoners as well.
I always forget there's like little songs and poems in here. Okay, they're croaking to the flap of their feet on the stone. So let's do some like Foley here, you know, like this is like the flap of their feet on the stone, right?
Clap, snap, the black crack, grip, grab, pinch, nab, and down, down to Goblin Town. You go, my lad.
The giggling next to my mom. Well, I'm glad someone's enjoying this goblin tune I'm impromptu writing here. We gotta keep it going.
Clash, crash, crush, smash. Hammer and tongs, knocker and gongs, pound, pound, far underground. Ho, ho, my lad.
I feel like I'm a little bit too fast. I feel like this should be like the marching of like the soldiers in Wizard of Oz, but we've already set the pace, so we're gonna commit.
Swish, smack, whip, crack. Batter and beat, yammer and bleat, work, work, nor dare to shirk. While goblins quaff, the goblins laugh. Round and round, far underground below, my lad.
I guess quaff is quaff. I've never heard of the word quaff before that statement. But it rhymes with laugh. Sip of tea.
A sip of tea for the goblin's song.
It sounded truly terrifying, did it?
The walls echoed the clap, snap, and the crush, smash, and to the ugly laughter of their ho-ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was only too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with a whoosh-mack, and set them to running as fast as they could in front of them, and more than one of the dwarves were already yammering and bleeding like anything when they stumbled into a big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle, and by torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They all laughed, and stamped and clapped their hands when the dwarves, with poor little Bilbo at the back and nearest the whips, came running in, while the goblin drivers whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already there, huddled in a corner, and there were all the baggages and packages lying broken open and being rummaged through by the goblins, and smelt by the goblins, and fingered by the goblins, and quarreled over by the goblins. I'm 12 years old. I am afraid that was the last they ever saw of those excellent little ponies, including a jolly, sturdy little white fellow that Elrond had lent Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for mountain paths. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys, and other much more dreadful things, and they are always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs and linked them all together in a line, and dragged them to the far end of the cavern with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the row. There, in the shadows, on a large flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head. And armed goblins were standing round him carrying the axes and the bent swords that they use. Now, goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but the most skilled of dwarves. When they take the trouble, though, they're usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture they make very well, or get other people to make to their design. Prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, and those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. They did not hate dwarves, especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous. In some parts, wicked dwarves had even made alliances with them. But they had no special grudge against Thorin's people, because of the war which you have heard mentioned, but which just does not come into this tale. And anyway, goblins don't care much who they catch, as long as it is done smart and in secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. Who's the great goblin sound like? I'm like tempted to make him sound like kind of like very unintimidating. Okay.
Who are these miserable persons?
Said the great goblin.
Dwarves. And this?
Said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so that he fell forward onto his knees.
We found them sheltering in our front porch. Oh, what do you mean by it?
Said the great goblin, turning to Thorin.
Up to no good, I'll warrant. Spying on the private business of my people, I guess. Thieves. I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers! And friends of the elves! Not unlikely. Come. What have you got to say?
Thorin the dwarf, at your service, he replied. It was merely a polite nothing. Of the things which you suspect and imagine, we had no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins in any way whatever. And that was true enough.
Said the great goblin. So you say. Might I ask what you were doing up in the mountains at all? And where you were coming from? And where you were going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it will do you much good, Thorin Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already, but let's have the truth, or I will prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you.
We were on a journey to visit our relatives, our nephews and nieces, and first, second, and third cousins, and the other descendants of our grandfathers who live on the east side of these truly hospitable mountains. Said Thorin, not quite knowing what to say all at once in the moment, when obviously the exact truth wouldn't do it all. Ailing says, I want to punch this goblin in the nose to see if he'll sound even more like a quacking duck. Well, then good. I guess we're getting the point across then. Nocturne said, "Love the voice acting." Well, thank you. I'm trying to get paid for it more. Hey, if you're watching this and you need a voice actor, I am one. Where were we here?
He's a liar. Oh, truly tremendous one,
Said one of the drivers.
Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are now dead as stones. Also, he's not explained this.
He held out the sword which Thorin had worn. The sword which had come from a troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all of his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time, when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills, or did battle before their walls. They had called it Orcrist, Goblin Cleaver, but the goblins called it simply Biter. They hated it, and hated worse anyone that carried it.
Murderers! Murderers and elf friends! The great goblin shouted. Slash them! Beat them! Bite them! Gnash them! Take them away to dark holes full of snakes! And never let them see the light again.
He was in such a rage that he jumped off of his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth wide open. Just in that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went off into a tower of blue glowing smoke right up to the roof that scattered piercing white sparks all amongst the goblins. The yells and yammering, croaking, gibbering and jabbering, howls, growls, curses, shrieking, and squeaking that followed were beyond description. Those are a lot of words describing something that is beyond description. Several wild cats and wolves being roasted slowly alive together would not have compared with it. The sparks were burning holes into the goblins, and the smoke that now fell from the roof made the air too thick for even their eyes to see through. Soon they were falling over one another and rolling in heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting as if they had all gone mad. Suddenly, a sword flashed in its own light. Shing! Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded in the middle of his rage. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. "Follow me, quick!" said a voice fierce and quiet, and before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again, as fast as he could trot, at the end of the line, down more dark passages with yells of the goblin hall growing fainter behind him. A pale light was leading them on.
"Quicker! Quicker!" said the voice. "The torches will soon be relit."
"Half a minute," said Dory, who was at the back next to Bilbo, and a decent fellow. He made the hobbit scramble on his shoulders as best he could with his tied hands, and then off they all went at a run, with a clink, clink, clink of the chains, and many a stumble, since they had no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long while did they stop, and by that time they must have been right down into the mountain's very heart. Fleetwood! Pleasure to have you here! For some goblin slaying? I was gonna say some Hobbit reading, but it is both true. There's hobbits being read and there are goblins being slain. Then, Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course it was Gandalf. But just then they were too busy to ask how he got there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burned with a rage and made it gleam if goblins were about, and now it was as bright as blue flame for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free as quickly as possible. This sword's name was Glamdring the Foe Hammer, if you remember. The goblins just called it Beater, and hated it even worse than Biter, if possible. Orchrist too had been saved, for Gandalf had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things, and though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for friends in a tight corner.
"Are we all here?"
said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow.
Let me see. 1, that's Thorin. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now where are Philly and Keely? Oh, there they are. 12, 13, and here's Mr. Baggins. 14. Well. Might be worse. And then again, it might be a good deal better. No ponies, no food, and no knowing quite where we are. And hordes of angry goblins just behind. Well, on we go.
And on they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries far behind in the passages they had come through. That sent them on faster than ever, and as poor Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, for dwarves can roll along at a tremendous pace, I can tell you, when they have to, they took it in turn to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these goblins knew the way better. They had made the path themselves, after all, and they were madly angry. So that do what they could, the dwarves heard the cries and howls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of the goblin feet. Many feet, which seemed only just around the corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel. They were following, and they were getting deadly tired.
Oh, what did I ever do to leave my hobbit hole?
Said poor Mr. Baggins, bumping up and down on Bomber's back.
Why did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?
Said Bomber, who was fat, and staggered along with the sweat dripping down his nose in heat and terror. At this point, Gandalf fell behind, and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner.
About turn,
he shouted.
Draw your sword, Thorin.
There was nothing else to be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying round the corner in full cry, and found Goblin Cleaver and Foe Hammer shining cold and bright, right in their astonished eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The ones behind yelled still more and leaped back, knocking over those that were running away after them.
Biter and Baiter!
They shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling back the way they had came. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By that time, the dwarves had gone on again, a long way, on into the dark tunnels of the goblins' realm. When the goblins discovered that, they put out their torches, and they slipped on soft shoes, and they chose out their quickest runners and sharpest ears and eyes. These ran forward, as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noise than bats. That is why neither Bilbo nor the dwarves, nor even Gandalf himself heard them coming. Nor did they see them, but they were seen by the goblins that ran silently up behind, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. Quite suddenly, Dory, now at the back again carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. Hoo! He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumped his head on a hard rock, tunk, and remembered nothing more. And that is the end of chapter 4. Wow, we blistered through that under an hour. Maybe I'm reading too fast. It's been so long since I've read with the gang. Maybe I'm just so excited. But heck yeah. Chapter 4 down. We're gonna head into chapter 5 in a little bit. We're gonna take a second, have a little sip of tea if you got it. Sip of water if you need it. Happy to have everyone here. Nocturne says, poor Hobbit. I know, Bilbo. Bilbo's never had any luck. Junji said, 'twas a perfect speed. Oh, well, thank you. It's so funny, like, reading aloud. Especially because, you know, but the rhythm of the story was fast, so it makes sense. Yeah, true, that part of the story, you know, there's a lot happening. There's fights and running and blah, blah, blah. But it's funny, you know, reading aloud, because I'm also reading, for, like, my own enjoyment right now, I'm reading Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. And, you know, the writing styles are just, like, so different. Obviously, this is written very sort of whimsically, and words are over-exaggerated, and passages are over-elongated, and, you know, it's just funny. Sometimes, like, I'm reading a sentence like I would read, like, a more, what's the word? Like, traditionally constructed sentence, you know? And then I look and I'm like, oh, it's still going on. Oh, they're adding in another word after it. Like, it's really funny. It has, like, its very own sort of, like, pacing and, like, construction, which is, you know, which is so charming. That's one of the reasons why it's so charming. But it is funny to read aloud that way. Well, thank you all for joining so far. Last time we read through The Hobbit together, I think we chopped through 3 chapters. I mean, yeah, this last time we read, we were on chapter 4, so I'm hoping we get at least that much. If we're doing a chapter in an hour, that seems about right. I will open one more cough drop preemptively in case I need it. But I won't pop it in yet. I'll keep it to the side, real sneaky-like.
Like a goblin. Hiding treasure. Just a great goblin. The great goblin!
Well, we hardly got to hate the Great Goblin. We heard them shriek for a little bit, and then they got slain. I guess the Great Goblin did all the Great Goblin needed to do. With that being said, though, I think we are going to chug right along to chapter 5. Riddles in the Dark. My book is page 65 if you're following along, or just find the chapter marker for chapter 5. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as... Something just fell on my head. What was that? Oh, never mind. I know what that was. I had something on top of my dresser that I forgot was there. Yeah, literally, Bilbo gets hit on the head, and then I get hit on the head. I'm really trying to sell the experience here with the stream tonight. Loki said, what? Yeah, that's how I felt when that thing just bopped me on the head. Anyway, let's try that again, shall we? Let's try not to have a piece of debris fall on my noggin this time. I will have that cough drop. I decided. Immersion off the charts right now. Yeah. Listen, you know, you got those. You all downloaded the immersion mod for The Hobbit, right? You can fit it in your load order pretty much anywhere. You know, it doesn't conflict with anything. It just means I get hit in the head with a couple of random objects every once in a while. Back from the top, chapter 5. Riddles in the Dark. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as with them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and he could feel nothing, except the cold stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours till he touched the wall of the tunnel, but neither up nor down could he find anything. Nothing at all, no sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction they had been going in when he had his fall. He guessed as well as he could, and crawled along for a good way, till suddenly His hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of any particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long time. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or other, but that only made him miserabler. He could not think what to do, nor could he think what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why, if he had been left behind, the goblins had not caught him, or even why his head was so sore. The truth was, he had been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind in a very dark corner for a long while. After some time, he felt around for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches, and he could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him, as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought on him out of the holes in that horrible, horrible place. Still, at the moment he felt very crushed. But in slapping all his pockets and feeling all round himself for matches, his hand had come on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger that he had got from the trolls, and that he had quite forgotten, nor fortunately had the goblins noticed, as he wore it inside of his breeches. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes.
Oh, so it is an elvish blade too,
he thought.
And goblins are not very near, and yet,
not far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the goblin wars of which so many songs had been sung. And also, he had noticed that such weapons made great impression on goblins that came upon them so suddenly.
Go back?
He thought.
No, not good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward. Oh, it's the only thing to do. Well, on we go.
So up he got, and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, and one hand feeling the wall, and his heart all of a pitter and patter. Now, certainly Bilbo was in what we called a tight place, but you must remember it was not quite so tight for him as it would have been for me or for you. Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, and after all, if their holes are nice and cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of the goblins, but still they are more used to tunneling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground, not when their heads have recovered from being bumped. Also, they can move very quietly and hide easily, and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises. And they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard, or have forgotten long ago. I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggins's place all the same. The tunnel seemed to have no end. All he knew was that it was still going down pretty steadily, and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and a turn or two. There were passages leading off to the side every now and then, and he knew by the glimmer of his sword, or could feel with his hand on the wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past for fear of goblins or half-imagined dark things coming out of them. On he went, and down, and still he heard no sound of anything except the occasional whir of a bat by its ears, which startled him at first, till it became too frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept on like this, hating to go on like this, not daring to stop, on and on until he was tireder than tired. It seemed like all the way to tomorrow and over it to the days beyond. A never-ending tunnel is one of my nightmares, says Ailing. Like the back room, says Loki. I don't know what the back rooms are, but if they are anything like a never-ending tunnel, that sounds horrible. Don't go to the back rooms. Leave them alone. Suddenly, without any warning, he trotted splash into the water. It was icy cold. That pulled him up sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream that crossed the passage, or the brink of a deep, dark subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped, and he could hear, and when he listened hard, drops. Drip, drip, dripping from an unseen roof into the water below. But there seemed to be no other sort of sound around. Aye, so it is a pool or a lake, and not an underground river, he thought. Still, he did not dare to wade out into the darkness. He couldn't swim, and he thought, too, of nasty, slimy things with big, bulging, blind eyes wriggling in the water. There are strange things living in the pools and lakes in the hearts of mountains. Fish whose fathers swam in, goodness only knows how many years ago, and never swam out again, while their eyes grew bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see in the blackness. Also, there are other things more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and caves the goblins have made for themselves, there are other things living unbeknown to them that have sneaked in from the outside to lie up in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back in their beginnings to ages before the goblins, who would only widen them and join them with their passages, and the original owners are still there, in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. Deep down here by the dark water lived old Gollum. Oh no. Somehow I had entirely forgotten that was going to be a thing we were going to have to contend with. Here we go. Deep down here by the dark water lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. He was Gollum. As dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make. Not he. He was looking out of his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin, he thought, good when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if they ever came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountain. They had come on the lake when they were tunneling down long ago, and they had found they could go no further. So there their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now, from the distance, with his pale eyes like telescopes. So stalkery. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island, while Bilbo was sitting on the brink altogether flummoxed and at the end of his way and his wits. Suddenly, up came Gollum and whispered and hissed. Okay. I'm gonna need like a trigger phrase to get me into Gollum. Like, what is like a fish, a fish, a fish, a fish, right? That's like
Stupid fat hobbit says.
something like that.
Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. And a tasty morsel it makes us, Gollum.
And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That is how he got his name, although he always called himself My Precious. The goblet jumped nearly out of his skin when the hiss came to his ears, and suddenly saw the pale eye sticking out at him. Hi! Who are you? He said, thrusting his dagger in front of him.
Oh. What is he, my precious?
Whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, though never having anyone else to speak to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise, he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. I'm Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves, and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know. If only I can just get away.
A sword! My precious.
Why is Gollum so hard to keep up? Thank you, Junji, but it's a hard one to keep going.
A fish!
Yeah, that's gonna be the word.
A fish! A sword! A blade, in which came out of Gondolin.
Said Gollum and became quite polite.
Perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bit, my precious. It likes riddles, perhaps. It does. It does it.
He was anxious to appear friendly at any rate for the moment, and until he found out more about that sword and that hobbit, whether he was quite alone really, whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking them, and sometimes guessing them, had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes in the long, long ago, before he lost all of his friends and was driven away, alone, and crept down, down, into the dark under the mountains. All right, very well, said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree, until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was a friend of goblins. You ask first, he said, because he had not had the time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed.
What has roots and nobody sees? It is taller than the trees. Up, up it goes, 'cause it never grows.
That's easy, said Bilbo. Mountain, I suppose.
Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If Precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eat it, my precious. If it asks us and we don't answer, then we does what it wants. We shows you the way out. Yes.
All right, said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do.
Chestnuts! Chestnuts!
He hissed.
Teeth! Teeth! My precious, but we only have 6!
Then he asked his second.
Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters.
Half a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this before, and getting his wits back, he thought of an answer. "Oh, wind! Wind, of course," he said, and he was so pleased that he'd made that one up on the spot. Oh, sorry. And he was so pleased that he made up one on the spot. "This'll puzzle the nasty little underground creature," he thought. "An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye," said the first eye, "but in a low place, not in high place."
Oh,
said Gollum. He had been underground a long time and was forgetting these sorts of things. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a dark hole by the bank of a river.
"My precious. Sun on the daisies! It does! It does!"
But these ordinary, above-ground, everyday riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him in out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry, so this time he tried something a bit more difficult and a bit more unpleasant.
It cannot be seen. It cannot be felt. Cannot be heard. Cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills. An empty, empty horse it fills. It comes first and follows after. It owns life and kills laughter.
Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all around him anyway. "Dark," he said without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking hat. "A box without hinges, a key or a lid, yet gold and treasures is hid." He asked to gain time. Yeah, that's a weird passage. "A box without hinges, key or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid." He asked to gain time until he could think of a really hard one. This, he thought, a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words. But it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and still he did not answer. He whispered and sputtered.
I don't know. What is it?
After some while, Bilbo became impatient. "Well? What is it?" he said. "The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noise you're making."
Give us a chances! Give us a chances! Ah, my precious.
"Well," Bilbo said after giving him a long chance, "what about your guess then?" But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago and sitting under the riverbank, teaching his grandmother to suck axes! He hissed, "Axes! Axes!" he asked.
Alive without a breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, yet never clinking.
He also, in his turn, thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer. But he could not remember anything better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course, or can guess it is as easy as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home, and have not the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss in pleasure to himself.
Oh, it is now, my precious. Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable?
He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. "Half a moment," said the Hobbit, shivering. I gave you a good long chance just now."
It must make haste! It must make haste!
Gollum said, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long, webby foot into the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. "Oh!" he said. "It's cold and clammy!" And so he guessed. "Fish! Fish! It's a fish!" Gollum was dreadfully disappointed. But Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as ever he could, so that Gollum had to get back into his boat and think. No legs, lay on one leg. 2 legs sat near on 3 legs. 4 legs got some. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing if he had asked it about it another time. As it was, talking of fish, no legs was not so very difficult. And after that, the rest was easy.
Fish on a little table. A man at table sitting at stool, and the cat has the bones.
That, of course, was the answer, and Gollum soon gave it. Then, he thought the time had come to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said.
This thing, all things devours. Birds' beasts, trees' flowers. Gnaws iron, gnaws steel. Grinds hard stones to meal. Slays kings, ruins town. And beats high mountain down.
Poor Bilbo sat in the dark thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard of in tales, but not one of them had done all these things. He had a feeling the answer was quite different and that he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that is bad for thinking. "Fungi," said Loki. For the guess? Ooh, let's see. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming toward him. His tongue seemed to stick out in his mouth. He wanted to shout out, "Give me more time! Give me more time!" But all that came out with a sudden squeal was, "Time! Time!" Bilbo was saved by pure dumb luck. For that, of course, was the answer. Gollum was disappointed once more. And now he was getting angry, and also tired of this game. It had made him very hungry indeed. This time, he did not go back to the boat. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo, and that made the Hobbit most dreadfully uncomfortable and scattered his wits.
It's got to just ask us a question, my precious. Yes, yes, yes. Just one more question to guesses. Yes, yes,
said Gollum. But Bilbo simply could not think of any question. That nasty, wet, cold thing sitting next to him and pawing and poking him. He scratched himself, he pinched himself. Still, he could not think of anything.
Asks us! Asks us!
Said Gollum. Bilbo pinched himself and slapped himself. He gripped on his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. And there, he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten about. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was the riddle, and he was frightfully upset.
No fair! No fair!
He hissed.
This isn't fair, my precious. Is it to ask us what it's got in its nasty little pockets?
Bilbo, seeing what had happened and having nothing better to ask, stuck to this question. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said louder. Hissed Gollum.
It must give us 3 guesses, yes, my precious 3 guesses.
Very well. Guess away.
Hanses!
Wrong, said Bilbo, who had luckily just taken his hand out of his pocket. Guess again. And Gollum got more upset than ever. He thought of all the things he kept in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblin teeth, wet shells, a bit of bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen his fangs on, and other nasty things. He tried to think of what other people kept in their pockets.
Knife! Knife!
He said at last. Wrong, said Bilbo, who had lost his some time ago. It's your last guess. Now, Gollum was in a much worse state than when Bilbo had asked him the egg question. He hissed and sputtered and rocked himself backwards and forwards and slapped his wet feet on the floor and wriggled and squirmed, but still he did not dare waste his last guess. Come on, said Bilbo. I'm waiting. He tried to sound bold and cheerful, but he did not feel at all sure how the game was going to end, whether Gollum guessed right or not. Time's up, he said.
Swing? Or nothing!
Shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working with 2 guesses at once. Both wrong, cried Bilbo, very much relieved, and he jumped at once to his feet, put his back to the nearest wall, and held out his tiny sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. But he felt he could not trust this slimy thing to keep any promise in a pinch. Any excuse would do for him to slide out of it. And after all, that last question had not been a genuine riddle according to the ancient laws. Junji says Gollum was most definitely a precursor to Cicero. Mother is the precious.
Yes. Night mother, night mother. Oh. We'll adore your night mothers.
But at any rate, Gollum did not at once attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering. At last, Bilbo could wait no longer. Yours. Well, he said, what about your promise? I want to go. You said you'd show me the way.
Did we say so, princesses? Sure, the nasty little bargains the way out. Yes, yes. But what has it got in its pockets, huh? That string? Precious, but not nothing. Oh, no. Oh, no. Go!
Never you mind, said Bilbo. A promise is a promise.
Course it is! Impatient! Precious!
Hissed Gollum.
But it must wait. Yes, it must. We can't go to the tunnel so hasty. We must go and get some things first, yes. Things to help us.
Well, hurry up, said Bilbo, relieved to think of Gollum going away. He thought he was just making an excuse and did not mean to come back. What was Gollum talking about? What useful thing could he keep out on the dark lake? But he was wrong. Gollum did mean to come back. He was angry now and hungry. And he was a miserable, wicked creature, and already he had a plan. Not far away on his island, of which Bilbo knew nothing, and there in his hiding place he kept a few wretched oddments, and one very beautiful thing. A very beautiful, very wonderful thing. He had a ring, a golden, precious ring.
My birthday present!
He whispered to himself, as he had often done in the endless dark days.
That is what we want to now. Yes, we want it.
He wanted it because it was a ring of power, and if you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, and that would be shaky and faint.
My birthday present. It came to me on my birthday. My precious.
So he had always said to himself. But who knows how Gollum came by that present ages ago in the old days when such rings were still at large in the world. Perhaps even the master who ruled them could not have said. Gollum used to wear it at first till it tired him, and then he kept it in a pouch next to his skin till it galled him. And now, usually he hid it in a hole in the rock on his island, and was always going back to look at it. And still, sometimes he put it on, when he could not bear to be parted from it any longer, or when he was very, very hungry and tired of fish. Then he would creep along the dark passages looking for stray goblins. He might even venture into places where the torches were lit and made his eyes blink and smart, for he would be safe. Oh yes, quite safe. No one would see him. No one would notice him till he had all his fingers around their throat. Only a few hours ago he had worn it and caught a small goblin imp. How it squeaked! He still had a bone or two left to gnaw, but he wanted something softer.
Quite safe. Yes,
he whispered to himself.
It won't see us, will it, my precious? No, it won't see us, and its nasty little sword will be useless. Yes, quite.
That is what was in his wicked little mind, as he slipped suddenly from Bilbo's side and flapped back to his boat, and went off into the dark. Bilbo thought he had heard the last of him. Still, he waited for a while, for when he had no idea how to find his way out alone. Suddenly he heard a screech. It sent a shiver down his back. I lost my place for the shriek. Gollum was cursing and wailing away in the gloom, not very far off by the sound of it. He was on his island, scrabbling here and there, searching and seeking in vain.
Where is it? Where is it?
Bilbo heard him crying.
Lost it! Lost it is! Oh, my precious is lost. Lost. Curse us and crush us! Oh, my precious is lost.
What's the matter? Bilbo called. What have you lost?
It mustn't ask us,
shrieked Gollum.
Not its businesses, no! It's lost! It's lost!
Well, so am I! Cried Bilbo. And I want to get unlost. And I won the game, and you promised. So come along, come and let me out, and then go on with your looking. Utterly miserable as Gollum sounded, Bilbo could not find much pity in his heart, and he had a feeling that anything Gollum wanted so much could hardly be something good. Come along, he shouted.
No, not that, precious,
Gollum answered.
We must search for it. It's lost.
But you never guessed my last question, and you promised, said Bilbo.
Never guessed,
said Gollum. Then suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss.
What has it got in its pockets? Tell us that. It must tell first.
As far as Bilbo knew, there was no particular reason why he should not tell. Gollum's mind had jumped to a guess quicker than his, naturally, for Gollum had brooded for ages on this one thing. Junji redeemed hydrate? Thank you, that's probably called for. Little water break. How's everybody doing? Everyone having fun? Everyone having a good time? Listening to the riddle game? Ailing said back hurty. Why's your back hurt? Are you pulling a me where you're like this on your chair? I'm cleaning apartment to the stream. Oh, well that's, hey, at least you're being productive. The Gollum impression has made my week. It's like, it's, you know, it's one of those things where certain phrases help me find it, you know? And then, like, as I keep going, sometimes it, like, wavers in and out. But thank you, you know, it's a fun one. Nocturne says, really good, doing well. Well, I'm glad you're doing well, Nocturne, and thank you for joining the stream after we haven't seen you in a while. It's a pleasure. Loki said chilling. Chilling that people are being productive, or chilling a little Gollum voice. Aw, Ailing, you love my voice acting. It's so good. You're the best. Thank you. Gremlin noises. it's just like nothingness sounds. It's like what is the like the Jawas, you know? It's just like do whatever you want. In parentheses, do whatever you want. But yes, I'm drinking the tea. I guess it's hydrating, right? It's not dehydrating. Should be drinking the water too. I am going to prepare another cough drop, especially after because I'm using a lot of gunk back here. You could do a sick Reekling voice. Oh, hell yeah. Hey, Bethesda. Hey, Todd Howard. I know that you've joined my Twitch stream reading The Hobbit. You cheeky son of a bitch. Hire me. Make me a Reekling. I love you. Thank you, Papa Howard. Give you a kiss. Give you kisses. Also, when's the next Elder Scrolls? And can I play it on my PS4? Cause that's all I got. Unless if I get a new PC for like the stream stuff, which I do want to do anyway, then I could do it on the PC and I could mod for the first time. I could mod. I've never been able to mod any of my Elder Scrolls games. I just literally watch the mod community grow and like all the things they make because I'm so mesmerized by it. that's like I'm weird. Same here. I have a PS4 and PC, says Nocturne. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't really even play my PS4 that much anymore, so it's like, you know, it's only for certain games that will come out that, like, you know, I'm really loyal to, that I, like, recommit to every time they have a new release. Elder Scrolls is one, right? I'm always going to play a new Elder Scrolls game, no matter where I am in life, no matter how much it doesn't make sense. But, like, I'm not always buying new games, you know? Can't afford a PS5. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, are people still, like, scalping them and, like, holding them hostage? That's wild. Because they were just even more expensive. My friend actually got a PS5, and I was astounded by how big it was. Like, it looks like a piece of sci-fi equipment. Like, it looks like a spaceship. It's wild. It becomes addicting modding. Yeah, I imagine. Like, trying to make, like, load orders without something breaking. Like, painfully optimizing it so you can get all the cool things you want in at the same time. I can only imagine. Always get back to comfort games. Yeah, they cozy. Mass Effect series will always be mine. Yeah, I will always show up for a new Mass Effect game, too. Absolutely. Mass Effect, Elder Scrolls, Dragon Age. We talked a lot about them last stream, actually. Like, games that I really enjoy. I will always turn up for those games. But yeah, like a lot of games in between. I used to be that guy who would like, pre-order like any game that I thought I would like, or that like I knew like my friends were gonna play when I played multiplayer games. So I just would play a lot more games and I'd spend a lot more money. But now I'm far more selective. Also, I have less time, so I have to be more selective. Also, I pay my own bills now, so I have to be more selective. Skyrim has been my life since 4th grade, so I just have to go back. Yeah, I mean, God, 4th grade. Wow, I'm trying to think of when I was playing Skyrim. Was it late high school or was it early college? I can't remember. I mean, I played it a lot. I played it multiple times, so it's kind of hard to know when one playthrough began and the other ended. Back then, too, those were the days where I would play like a game multiple times. Like, this would be my warrior run. This would be my rogue run. This would be my magic run, But, like, now, once again, I have to be a little bit more exacting with the kind of playthroughs I have. Ailing says, yeah, no more 15Ks on Gacha now that I have to be responsible. As you play, Genshin? Oh, yes, I know what game I'm talking about. Yeah, I know that you really like your game, Ailing. It's okay, you're allowed to like it. To be honest, if we were talking comfort games, I'd probably go with Oblivion. I mean, that was my first Elder Scrolls game. I know there are a lot of purists out there that are like, wow, my brain. The one before Oblivion, which I began but never finished. That's everyone's like, their masterpiece. And I get it. Like, I played it. It was really cool. But I was kind of like too young to appreciate it. Morrowind, thank you, Loki. I was too young to appreciate it, and it was a lot more complicated to understand, So I like started it and I thought it was cool, but I was like, this is all very overwhelming. Like, I have to tap out. But then I got a little older, Oblivion came out, I actually understood how it worked. So I was like, oh yeah, I could play this multiple times. And then I did. Love Final Fantasy games, just bought Pixel Remaster. I used to play all the Final Fantasy games. I stopped after... Well, my first one was 7. That's a lie. Interesting fact about me. My first game was Final Fantasy X. I'd never played a Final Fantasy game before them. And then I was like so enamored with 10 that I went back and I played 7 through to 10, right? Because I just loved 10 so much. It was like all the Final Fantasies have to be good, and they all were pretty good. And then 10-2 came out, and I was kind of like, meh. And then like the next Final Fantasy game I think was like online or something. And I never really had the kind of computer that could do an online game, so I was like, I guess I won't play that. And then I just sort of never went back to Final Fantasy. I guess my taste changed too. I started playing more, Western-style RPGs and like that kind of thing. Played more D&D. But yeah, there was a time though where I played the hell out of Final Fantasy X. I played Final Fantasy X to the point where like I did all of the secret Aeon missions, had all the special summons. I had the strategy guide, which taught you all of the people who were blitzball players in the world and who had the best blitzball stats. So I had an optimized blitzball team. Obviously some of the characters I kept because they were like my favorite characters, but like I'd be bored one day and I'd be like, you know what? I could play a few rounds of blitzball. Like, I wasn't even questing. I was like, yeah, I could play some underwater soccer for a little bit. That's fine. Who was I? Never finished Oblivion. That should probably be your summer project. Yeah, I mean, I recommend it. Like I said, it was like my darling growing up. My Elder Scrolls darling before Skyrim, so it's hard to beat. Hard to beat in terms of like overall quality of content. Pretty good. All right. Back to where we were. I'll go back a little bit since we got sidetracked a bit. But you never guessed my last question, and you promised, said Bilbo.
Never guessed,
said Gollum, when suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss.
What has it got in its pockets? Tell us that. It must tell first.
As far as Bilbo knew, there was no particular reason why he should not tell. Gollum's mind had jumped to a guess quicker than his, naturally, for Gollum had brooded for ages on this one thing, and he was always afraid of it being stolen. But Bilbo was annoyed at the delay. After all, he had won the game pretty fairly and at horrible risk. Answers were to be guessed, not given, he said.
But it wasn't a fair question, said Gollum. Not a riddle, princess, no.
Oh, well, if it's a matter of ordinary questions, Bilbo replied, then I asked one first. What have you lost? Tell me that!
What has it got in its pockets?
The sound came hissing louder and sharper, and as he looked towards it, to his alarm, Bilbo now saw two small points of light peering at him. As suspicion grew in Gollum's mind, the light of his eyes burned with a pale flame. What have you lost? Bilbo persisted. But now the light in Gollum's eyes had become a green fire, and it was coming swiftly nearer. Gollum was in his boat again, paddling wildly back to the dark shore, and such a rage of loss and suspicion was in his heart that no sword had any more terror for him. Bilbo could not guess what had maddened the wretched creature, but he saw that all was up, and that Gollum meant to murder him at any rate. Just in time, he turned and ran blindly back up the dark passage, down which he had come, keeping close to the wall and feeling it with his left hand.
What has it got in its pockets?
He heard the hiss loud behind him, and a splash as Gollum leapt from his boat. What have I wonder, he said to himself as he panted and stumbled along. He put his left hand in his pocket. The ring felt very cold as it quietly slipped onto his groping forefinger. The hiss was close behind him. He turned now and saw Gollum's eyes like small green lamps coming up the slope. Terrified, he tried to run faster, but suddenly he struck his toes on a snag in the floor and fell flat with his little sword under him. In a moment, Gollum was on him. But before Bilbo could do anything, recover his breath, pick himself up, or wave his sword, Gollum passed by, taking no notice of him, cursing and whispering as he ran. What could it mean? Gollum could see in the dark. Bilbo could see the light of his eyes palely shining, even from behind. Painfully, he got up and sheathed his sword, which was now glowing faintly again. Then very cautiously he followed. There seemed nothing else to do. It was no good crawling back down to Gollum's water. Perhaps if he followed him, Gollum might lead him to some way of escape without meaning to.
Curse it! Curse it! Curse it!
Hissed Gollum.
Curse the Peggasus! It's gone! What has it got in his Peggasus? Oh, we guess. My precious. He's found it. Yes, he must have. My birthday present.
Bilbo pricked up his ears. He was at last beginning to guess himself. He hurried a little, getting as close as he dared to behind Gollum, who was still going quickly, not looking back, but turning his head from side to side, as Bilbo could see from the faint glimmer on the walls.
My birthday present! Curse it! How did we lose it? My precious soul. Yes, that's it. When we came this way at last, when we twisted that nasty young squeaker, that's it! Curse it! It slipped from us! After all these ages and ages, it's gone! It's gone!
Suddenly, Gollum sat down and began to weep. a whistling and gurgling sound horrible to listen to. I lost my place again doing that horrible sound. Bilbo halted and flattened himself against the tunnel wall. After a while, Gollum stopped weeping and began to talk. He seemed to be having an argument with himself.
It's no good going back there to search, no! We don't remember all the places we visited. And it's no use. The Baggins has it in his pockets. The nasty noser has found it, we says. We guesses, precious, only guesses. We can't know till we find the nasty creature and squeezes it. But it doesn't know what the present can do, does it? It'll just keep it in its pockets. It doesn't know. And it can't go far. It's lost itself. It's nasty, nosy thing. It doesn't know the way out. It said so. He said so. But it is tricksy. It doesn't say what it means. It won't say what it's got in its pockets. It knows. It knows the way in. It must know the way out, yes. It's off to the back door. To the back door. That's it.
Turned a little German at the end there.
The goblins will catch it then. You can't get out that way, precious. Goblins, yes. But if it's got the present, present, then goblins will get it. They'll find it, and they'll find out what it does. It can't ever be safe again, ever. One of the goblins will put it on, and then no one will see him. He'll be here but not seen. Not even our clever houses will notice him. And he'll come creepsy and tricksy and catch us!
And that's...
Oh, then let's stop talking, precious, and make haste. If the Bragginses has gone that way, we must go and see. Go! Now for now, make haste!
With a spring, Gollum got up and started shambling off at a great pace. Bilbo hurried after him, still cautiously, though his chief fear now was of tripping on another snag and falling in with a noise. His head was in a whirl of hope and wonder. It seemed that the ring he had was a magic ring. It made you invisible. He had heard of such things, of course, in old tales, but it was hard to believe that he had really found one by accident. Still, there it was. Gollum, with his bright eyes, had passed him by only 1 yard to the side. On they went, Gollum flip-flapping ahead, hissing and cursing, Bilbo going as softly as a hobbit can. Soon, they came to places where, as Bilbo had noticed on the way down, side passages opened, this way and that. Gollum began to count them.
One left, yes. One right, yes. Two right, yes, yes. Two left, yes, yes.
And so on. And the count grew, and he slowed down, and he began to get shaky and weepy, for he was leaving the water further and further behind. And he was getting afraid. Goblins might be about, and he had lost his ring. At last, he stopped by a low opening on their left as they went up.
7 right, yes. 6 left, yes,
He whispered.
This is it. This is the way to the back door, yes. Here's the passage.
He peered in, and then shrank back.
But don't go in, precious. No, we doesn't. Goblins is down there. Lots of goblins is. We smells them. What do we do? Curse them and crush them. We must wait here, precious. Wait and see.
And so they came to a dead stop. Gollum had brought Bilbo to the way out after all, but Bilbo could not get in. There was Gollum sitting humped right in the opening, and his eyes gleamed cold in his head, and he swayed from side to side between his knees. Bilbo crept away from the wall more quietly than a mouse, but Gollum stiffened at once and sniffed. And his eyes went green. He hissed softly but menacingly. He could not see the hobbit, but now he was on alert, and he had other senses that the darkness had sharpened, hearing and smell. He seemed to be crouched right down with his flat hands splayed on the floor, and his hand thrust out, nose almost to the stone. Though he was only a black shadow in the gleam of his own eyes, Bilbo could see or feel that he was as tense as a bowstring, gathered for a spring. Bilbo almost stopped breathing and went stiff himself. He was desperate. He must get away out of this horrible darkness while he had any strength left. He must fight. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him, or tried to yet. And he was miserable, alone, and lost. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless, unmarked days without light or hope of betterment. Hard stone, cold fish, sneaking and whispering. All these thoughts passed in the flash of a second. He trembled, and then quite suddenly in another flash, as lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leaped. Not a great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Straight over Gollum's head he jumped, 7 feet forward and 3 in the air. Indeed, had he known it, he only just missed cracking his skull on the low arch of the passage. Gollum threw himself backwards and grabbed as the hobbit flew over him, but it was too late. His hands snapped on thin air, and Bilbo, falling fair on his sturdy feet, sped off down the new tunnel. He did not turn to see what Gollum was doing. There was a hissing and a cursing almost at his heels at first, and then it stopped. All at once there was a blood-curdling shriek, filled with hatred and despair. Gollum was defeated. He dare go no further. He had lost. He lost his prey, and lost, too, the only thing that he had ever cared for, his precious. The cry brought Bilbo's heart to his mouth, but he held on. Now, faint as an echo, but menacing, the voice came from behind.
Thief! 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 Packages! We hate it! We hate it! We hate it forever and ever!
Then there was a silence. But that too seemed menacing to Bilbo. If goblins are so near, they might have smelt them, he thought. Then they'll have heard his shrieking and cursing. Careful now, or this way will lead you to worse things. The passage was low and roughly made. It was not too difficult for the hobbit, except when, in spite of all his care, he stubbed his poor toes again, several times, on nasty, jagged stones in the floor. A bit low for goblins, at least for the big ones, thought Bilbo, not knowing that even big ones, the orcs of the mountains, go along at a great speed, stooping low with their hands almost on the ground. Soon, the passage that had been sloping down began to go up again, and after a while it climbed steeply. That slowed Bilbo down, but at last the slope stopped, the passage turned a corner and dipped down again, and there, at the bottom of a short incline, he saw, filtering round another corner, a glimpse of light. Not red light, as of fire or lantern, but a pale, out-of-doors sort of light. Then Bilbo began to run. Fleetwood says,
Precious! Oh, my precious!
Scuttling as fast as his legs would carry him, he turned the last corner and came suddenly right into an open space, where the light, after all this time in the dark, seemed dazzlingly bright. Oh, Dylan! 20th! Welcome! You just missed all of Gollum, I think. But don't worry, you can always check it out after it airs. Really, it was only a leak of sunshine in through a doorway, where a great door, a stone door, was left standing open. Bilbo blinked, and then suddenly he saw the goblins. Goblins in full armor with drawn swords sitting just inside the door and watching it with wide eyes, and watching the passage that led to it. They were aroused, alert, and ready for anything. Yes, amazing gremlin noises, says Ailing. They saw him sooner than he saw them. Yes, they saw him. Oh, we got two hydrates in the chat. I'll take the moment. I'll take the moment. Do I have any tea left? I have but a swig. I have but a swig of tea left. How's everybody doing? Thanks, 20th for coming in. But a swig, I say. Take a little sip of tea. Prep another cough drop. Look at us go. Loki said time to stretch. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, it's been a little while since I've been hunched over this book. We'll kill two birds with one stone.
We killed two fishes. A fish! A fish, a fish, a fish!
Oh. Okay. Oh, that was my spine. Let's go this way. Bangarang. That's how we do it. This is how we do it.
This is how we do it.
I'm going crazy.
This is now the precious.
Oh, God. Ugh.
I lost the precious. In our dark cave.
Oh, man. This is really... Oh, man. Gollum doing a workout video. Like Richard Simmons.
You will catch all the habits if you do the stretches. Yes.
Oh, God. I've been so tight. Because I have been kind of lazy on my gym routine. But there we go. That was a good stretch. Alright. That's the end of my tea. Which means now it's all water. It's all water. It's all water till the end, baby. Alright. Grab this. Where were we? Goblins were just spotting Bilbo. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, yes. The goblins were aroused, alert, and ready for anything. They saw him sooner than he saw them. Yes, they saw him. Whether it was an accident or a last trick of the ring before it took a new master, it was not on his finger. With yells of delight, the goblins rushed upon him. A pang of fear and loss, like an echo of Gollum's own misery, smote Bilbo, and forgetting even to draw his sword, he struck his hands into his pockets. And there was the ring still, in his left pocket, and it slipped onto his finger. The goblins stopped short. They could not see a sign of him. He had vanished. They yelled twice as loud as before, but not so delightedly.
Where is it?
They cried.
Go up to the passage,
Some shouted.
This way!
Some yelled.
That way!
Others yelled.
Look out for the door!
Bellowed the captain. Whistles blew, armor clashed, swords rattled, goblins cursed and swore and ran hither and thither, falling over one another and getting very angry. There was a terrible outcry, to-do, and disturbance. Bilbo was dreadfully frightened, but he had the sense to understand what had happened and to sneak behind the big barrel which he held drink for the goblin guards, and so get out of the way to avoid being bumped into, trampled to death, or caught by feel. I must get to the door. I must get to the door, he kept on saying to himself, but it was a long time before he ventured to try. Then it was like a horrible game of blind man's bluff. The place was full of goblins running about, and poor little Hobbit dodged this way and that, was knocked over by a goblin who could not make out what he had bumped into, scrambled away on all fours, slipped between the legs of the captain just in time, got up, and then ran for the door. It was still ajar. But a goblin had pushed it nearly to. Bilbo struggled, but he could not move it. He tried to squeeze through the crack. He squeezed and squeezed, and he stuck. It was awful. His buttons got wedged on the edge of the door and the doorpost. He could see outside into the open air. There were just a few steps running down into a narrow valley between two mountains. The sun came out from behind a cloud and shone bright on the outside of the door, but he could not get through. Suddenly, one of the goblins inside shouted,
There's a shadow by the door! Something is outside!
Bilbo's heart jumped into his mouth. He gave a terrific squirm. Buttons burst off in all directions. Ping, 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 ping. He was through, with a torn coat and waistcoat, leaping down the steps like a goat, while bewildered goblins were picking up twice the brass buttons on the doorsteps. Of course, they soon came down after him, hooting and hallooing and hunting among the trees, but they don't like the sun. It makes their legs wobble and their heads giddy. They could not find Bilbo with the ring on, slipping in and out of the shadow of the trees, running quick and quiet and keeping out of the sun. So soon, they went back grumbling and cursing to guard the door. And Bilbo had escaped. End of chapter 5. We're on chapter 6 now, baby. What a chapter. I like, it's funny, you know, the riddle part. I like how the narrator is like, you obviously know the answer to this riddle. And I'm like, do I? These are not riddles I would guess. Actually, I'm curious. I wonder if these are more common riddles than I assume they are. But I don't know any of the answers. Or at least I wouldn't guess them as easily as the narrator assumes I would. You obviously know the answer. I don't know. Thanks everyone for coming. This is how we do it. Now it's gonna be stuck in my head all night. I shouldn't sing it because I'll get a copyright strike. I'm just so good at replicating it, I'll get a copyright strike. How's everyone feeling? How is everybody feeling? We're going on 10. What is the likelihood? What is this chapter? I'm tempted to keep going. Trying to see, because I don't want to stop mid-chapter. Nocturne said Gollum singing.
This is how we do it.
Vibing. Nocturne says, it's fun to listen to. Well, thank you. That's the goal. The goal is to have fun and listen to some great literature. Some quality literature. What do we say, gang? Do we think we'd be able to knock this out before 11? 11 for me. Or do you think this would be a good stopping point? Oh, Loki, some nice voice acting. Thank you so much. That's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to do. Currently making peonies out of pipe cleaners for my sire. That is a sentence. A sentence if I ever heard one. Actually, I'm curious. How many... Do they give you a chapter listing? They do. Oh, man. It's like 30-some pages, I think, the next chapter. Because if we do 3 chapters a bit, right? 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12. We'd be able to do 3 chapters a session. It's like 4 sessions. If we do it that way. Yeah, let's do it. Fuck it. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he did not know where he was. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on and on till the sun began to sink westwards, behind the mountains. Their shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back. Then he looked forward, and could see before him only ridges and slopes falling towards lowlands and plains, glimpsed occasionally between the trees. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "I seem to have got right on the other side of the Misty Mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Oh, where can Gandalf and the dwarves have got to? I can only hope to goodness they're not still back there in the power of the goblins." Still, he wandered on, out of the little high valley over its edge and down the slopes beyond, but all the while a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside of him. He wondered whether he ought, now he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserable he felt about it, when he heard voices. He stopped, and he listened. It did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a stony path winding downwards with a rocky wall on the left hand. On the other side, the ground sloped away, and there were dells below the level of the path, overhung with bushes and low trees. In one of those dells, under the bushes, people were talking. He crept nearer, and suddenly he saw peering between 2 big boulders a head with a red hood on it. It was Balin, doing lookout. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He had still the ring on, for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. "I will give them all a surprise," he thought, as he crawled into the bushes at the edge of the dell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that had happened to them in the tunnels, and wondering and debating what they were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on with their journey without leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins, without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him.
"After all, he is my friend," said the wizard, "and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you'd not lost him."
The dwarves wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone with more sense.
"He has been more trouble to use for us for one,"
said one.
"If we've got to go back there now into those abominable tunnels to look for him, then drat him, I say."
Gandalf answered angrily.
"I brought him, and I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me look for him, or I go, and leave you here to get out of the mess as best you can yourselves. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before all this is over. Whatever did you want to go and drop him for, Dory?" "You would have dropped him," said Dory, "if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark, tripped up your feet, and kicked you in the back." "And why didn't you pick him up again?" "Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everybody falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped off my head with Glamdring, and Thorin was stabbing here and there and everywhere with Orcrist. All of a sudden, you gave me one of your blinding flashes, and we saw the goblins running back yelping. You shouted, 'Follow me, everybody,' and everybody ought to have followed. We thought everybody had. There was no time to count, you know, quite well, till we'd all dashed through the gate guards, out of the lower door, and helter-skelter down there, and here we are, without the burglar. Confiscate him."
"And here is the burglar," said Bilbo, stepping down into the middle of them, slipping off the ring. Bless me, how they jumped. Then they shouted with surprise and delight. Gandalf was astonished as any of them, but probably more pleased than all the others. He called to Balin and told him he thought a lookout man who let people walk right into them without warning. He called to Balin and told him he thought of what a lookout man who let walk... That is such a weird sentence. I gotta take that one slow. He called to Balin and told him what he thought of a lookout man who let people walk right into them like that without warning. I call that sentence is sus. I call sus on that sentence. It is a fact that Bilbo's reputation went up a very great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everyone said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing whatever about the ring. And when they asked him how he did it, he said, "Oh, you know, just crept along very carefully and very quietly."
"Well, this is the first time that even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted," said Balin. "And I take off my hood to you." Which he did. "Balin, at your service," said he.
"Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they had lost him, and he sat down and told them everything, except about finding the ring. Not just now, he thought. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition, and shuddered most appreciatively at his description of Gollum. And then, I couldn't think of any other question with him sitting beside me, ended Bilbo. So I said, "What's in my pocket?" And he couldn't guess in 3 goes. So I said, "What about your promise? Show me the way out." But he came at me to kill me, and I ran. And I fell over, and he missed me in the dark. Then I followed him because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, and so he was making for it. Then when he sat down there by the entrance, I couldn't get by. So I jumped over him and escaped and ran down the gate. "What about guards?" they asked.
"Weren't there any?"
"Oh yes, lots of them. But I dodged them. I got stuck in the door, which was, only open a crack, and I lost a lot of buttons," he said sadly, looking at his torn clothes. "But I squeezed through all right, and, well, here I am." The dwarves looked at him with quite a new respect when he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum, and squeezing through, as if it was not very difficult or very alarming.
What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guess."
He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed at that part of his tale that he had left out. Then he had questions of his own to ask, for if Gandalf had explained it all by now to the dwarves, Bilbo had not heard it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again and where they'd all gotten to now. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once. So now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the presence of evil goblins in that part of the mountain. But their main gate used to come out on a different pass, one more easy to travel by, so that they often caught people benighted near their gates. Evidently, people had given up going that way, and the goblins must have opened their new entrance at the top of the pass the dwarves had taken quite recently, because it had been found quite safe up until now.
I must see if I can't find a more or less decent giant to block it up again,
said Gandalf.
Or soon there will be no getting over those mountains at all.
As soon as Gandalf had heard Bilbo's yell, he realized what had happened. In the flash which killed the goblins that were grabbing him and he nipped the inside of the crack, just as it snapped to. He followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the Great Hall, and there he sat down and worked up the best magic he could in the shadows.
A very ticklish business. It was,
he said.
Touch and go.
But of course, Gandalf had made a very special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Even the Hobbit had never forgotten the magic fireworks at Old Took's Midsummer's Eve party, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo had lost all his buttons. As a matter of fact, it was well known to anybody who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took a wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide them in the right direction.
Oh, they made that gate ages ago, he said. Partly for a way of escape, if they needed one. Partly a way out into the lands beyond, where they still come in the dark and do great damage. They guard it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They will guard it doubly after this.
He laughed. All the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a good deal, but they had killed the Great Goblin and a great many others besides, and they had all escaped. So they might be said to have had the best of it all. But the wizard called them to their senses.
We must get going on at once, for now we are little rested, he said. They will be farther out, and after us in hundreds when the night comes, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we've passed. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon, if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by.
Oh, yes, he said in answer to more questions from the Hobbit. Oh, wait, the Hobbit didn't say that.
Oh, yes,
he said in answer to more questions from the Hobbit.
You lose track of time inside goblin tunnels. Today's Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles and come right down through the heart of the mountains and are now on the other side. Quite a shortcut. But we are not at the point to which our pass would have brought us. We're far to the north, and have some awkward country ahead. And we're still pretty high up. So, let's go on.
Oh, but I am dreadfully hungry, groaned Bilbo, who was all suddenly aware that he had not had one meal since the night before last. Just think of that for a hobbit. His stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly now that the excitement was over.
Can't help it, said Gandalf, unless you'd like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage.
No, thank you, said Bilbo.
Very well, then. We must tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves.
As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were only still in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he'd found on the bank, but it was not much good. They still went on and on. The rough path disappeared. The bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and the sage and the marjoram, and the yellow rock roses all vanished, and they found themselves at the top of a wide, steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down, and started other pieces below them slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off, crashing down with dust and noise. Before long, the whole slope above them and below seemed to move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together, in fearful confusion of slipping, of rattling, cracking slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pine that stood right up the mountain slope from deeper, darker forests of the valleys below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into lower branches. Some, like the little hobbit, got behind a tree to shelter from the onslaught of rocks. Soon the danger was over. The slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went bounding and spinning among the bracken and the pine roots far below.
Well, that has got us on a bit, said Gandalf. And even goblins tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly.
I dare say,
Grumbled Bomber.
but they won't find it difficult to find stones bouncing down on our heads.
The dwarves and Bilbo were feeling far from happy, and were rubbing their bruised and damaged legs and feet.
Nonsense! We're going to turn aside here out of the path and out of the slide. We must be quick. Look at the light.
The sun had gone behind the mountains. Already the shadows were deepening around them, though far away through the trees and over the black tops of those growing, lower down, they could see the evening lights on the plains beyond. They limped along now as fast as they were able to the gentle slopes of a forest in a slanting path leading steadily southwards. At times, they were pushing through a sea of bracken with tall fronds rising right above the hobbit's head, and at times they were marching along, quiet as quiet over a floor of pine needles. And all the while the forest gloom got heavier and the forest silence deeper. There was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighting into the branches of the trees. "Must we go any further?" asked Bilbo, when it was so dark that he could only just see Thorin's beard wagging beside him, and so quiet that he could not hear the dwarves breathing like a loud noise. "My toes are all bruised and bent, and my legs ache, and my stomach is wagging like an empty sack."
A bit further,
said Gandalf. After what seemed ages further, they came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and was shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them as not at all a nice place, although there was nothing to see. All of a sudden they heard a howl, away downhill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another to the right, and a good deal nearer to them, and then another not far away to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon. Wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins' hole at home, but he knew that noise. He had heard it described to him often enough in the tales. One of his older cousins, on the Took side, who had been a great traveler, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and do not need to see to catch you.
Is that the timestamp for the awoo ailing? Oh, Wolfpack. Wolfpack howl. I just realized Wolf's Hobbit voice sounds a lot like Pippin. Oh, good.
I always liked, it's like a little bit of an Irish affectation. They're just so cheery, you know? I like the Hobbits, they feel like cheery.
What shall we do? What shall we do? He cried. Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves, he said, and it became a proverb that we now say, out of the frying pan and into the fire, in the same sort of uncomfortable situations.
Up the trees!
Quick! Cried Gandalf, and they ran to the trees at the edge of the glade, hunting for those that had branches fairly low, or were slender enough to swarm up. They found them as quick as they could, and you can guess, and they went as high as ever they could trust the branches. You would have laughed, from a safe distance, if you had seen the dwarves sitting up in the trees with their beards dangling down like old gentlemen gone cracked and playing at being boys. Feely and Keely were at the top of a tall lark, like an enormous Christmas tree. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were more comfortable in a large, huge pine, with rectangular branches sticking out at intervals like the spokes of a wheel. Beaver, Bofer, Bomber, and Thorin were in another. Dwalin and Balin had swarmed up a tall, slender fir with a few branches and were trying to find a place to sit in the greenery of the topmost boughs. Gandalf, who was a good deal taller than the others, had found a tree into which they could not climb, a tall pine standing at the very edge of the glade. It was quite hidden in its boughs, but you could see his eyes gleaming in the moon as he peeped out. And Bilbo? He could not get into any tree, and was scuttling about from trunk to trunk, like a rabbit that has lost its hole and has a dog after it.
You've left the burglar behind again,
said Nori to Dori looking down.
I can't always be carrying burglars on my back,
said Dori.
Down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am, a porter?
He'll be eaten if we don't do something, said Thorin, for there were howls all around them now, getting nearer and nearer. Dori, he called, for Dori was lowest down in the easiest tree. Be quick, and give Mr. Baggins a hand up. Dori was really a decent fellow in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not reach his hand, even when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm down as far ever as he could. So Dori actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. What a good guide, that Dori. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted howling into the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dori did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off of his shoulders into the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself, only just in time. A wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up, and it nearly got him. In a minute, there was a whole pack of them just yelping all around the tree and leaping up at the trunk with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even the wild wargs, for so evil wolves over the edge of the wild were named, cannot climb trees. For a time, they were safe. Luckily, it was warm and not windy. Trees are not very comfortable to sit in for long at any time, but in the cold and the wind, with wolves all around below waiting for you, they can be perfectly miserable places. The glade in the ring of trees was evidently a meeting place of the wolves. More and more kept coming in. They left guards at the foot of the tree in which Dori and Bilbo were, and then went snuffling about till they had smelt out every tree that had anyone in it. They had guarded those too, while all the rest, hundreds and hundreds it seemed, went and sat in a great circle in the glade, and in the middle of the circle was a great gray wolf. He spoke to them in the dreadful language of the wargs. Gandalf understood it. Bilbo did not, but it sounded terrible to him, and as if all their talk was about cruel and wicked things, and it was. Every now and then, all the wargs in the circle would answer their grey chief all together, and their dreadful clamor almost made the hobbit fall out of his pine tree. I will tell you what Gandalf heard, though Bilbo did not understand it. The wargs and the goblins often helped one another in wicked deeds. Goblins do not usually venture very far from their mountains, unless they are driven out and are looking for new homes, or are marching to war, which I am glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days, they sometimes used to go on raids, especially to get food or slaves to work for them. Then they often got wargs to help and shared the plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do on horses. Now it seemed that a great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin, and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard, for whom they were probably still hunting. In spite of the dangers of this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into it from the south, cutting down trees and building themselves places to live, in amongst the more pleasant woods in the valleys and along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even wargs dared not attack them if there were many together, or in the bright of day. But now they had planned with the goblins' help to come by night upon some of the villages nearest the mountains. If their plan had been carried out, there would have been none left there the next day. All would have been killed except the few the goblins kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. This was dreadful talk to listen to, not only because of the brave woodmen and their wives and children, but also because of the danger which now threatened Gandalf and his friends. The wargs were angry and puzzled at finding them here in their very meeting place. They thought they were friends of the woodmen, who were come to spy on them, and would take news of their plans down into the valleys. And then the goblins and the wolves would have to fight a terrible battle instead of capturing prisoners and devouring people waked suddenly from their sleep. So the wargs had no intention of going away and letting the people up in the trees escape, at any rate not until morning. And long before that, they said, goblin soldiers would be coming down from the mountains, and goblins can climb trees, and even cut them down. Now, you can understand why Gandalf, listening to their growling and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard though he was, and to feel they were in a very bad place, and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have their own way. Though he could not do very much here, stuck up in the tall tree with wolves all around on the ground below. He gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of the tree. Then he set one alight with bright blue fire and threw it down, whizzing amongst the circle of wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught fire, and he was leaping to and fro and yelping horribly. Then another came, and another, one in blue flames, one in red, another in green. They burst on the ground in the middle of the circle and went off in colored sparks and smoke. A especially large one hit the chief wolf on the nose, and he leaped in the air 10 feet and then rushed around the circle, biting and snapping even at the other wolves in his anger and fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion they made filled all the forest. Wolves are afraid of fire at all times, but this was a most horrible and uncanny fire. If a spark got in their coats, it stuck and burned into them, and unless they rolled over quick, they were soon all in flames. Very soon, all about the glade, wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks on their backs, while those that were burning were running about howling and setting others alight, till their own friends chased them away and they fled down the slopes, crying and yammering and looking for water. Oh my goodness, who is this character? This name. What affectation do I give this character? I want to make him sound a bit like a prick, I think. "What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of all Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on top of a lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. "I hear wolves' voices. Are goblins at mischief in the woods?" He swept up into the air, and immediately two of his guards from the rocks at the either hand leapt up to follow him. They circled up into the sky and looked down upon the ring of the wargs, a tiny spot far, far below. But eagles have keen eyes, and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking, and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he could not see all the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion amongst the wolves and see tiny flashes of fire, and hear the howling and yelping come up faint and far from beneath him. Also, he could see the glint of the moon on goblin spears and helmets as long lines of the wicked folk crept down the hillsides from their gate and wound into the wood. Eagles are not kindly birds. Now I don't feel bad making the Lord sound like an asshole. Some are cowardly and cruel, but the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them. When they took notice of them all, which was seldom, for they did not eat such creatures, they swooped down on them and drove them shrieking back into their caves, and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. Tonight, the Lord of Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot, so he summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains. And suddenly, circling ever round and round, they came down towards the ring of wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. And a very good thing, too. Dreadful things had been going on down there. The wolves that had caught fire and fled into the forest had set it alight in several places. It was high summer, and on this eastern side of the mountains there had been little rain for some time. Yellowing bracken, fallen branches, deep-piled pine needles, and here there were dead trees, were all soon in flames. All around the clearing of the wargs, fire was leaping. But the wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were leaping and howling round the tree trunks and cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, and their tongues hanging out, their eyes shining as red and fierce as the flames. Then, suddenly, goblins came running up, yelling, "Allah!" They thought a battle with the woodmen was going on, but they soon learned what really had happened. Some of them actually sat down and laughed. Others waved their spears and clasped their shafts upon their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and they soon had a plan which seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack. Some stacked fern and brushwood round the tree trunks. Others rushed round and stamped and beat and stamped until near all the flames were put out. But they did not put out the fire nearest to the trees where the dwarves were. That fire they fed with leaves and dead branches and bracken. Soon they had a ring of smoke and flame all around the dwarves. A ring which they kept from spreading outwards, but it closed slowly in, till the running fire was licking the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes. He could feel the heat of the flames, and through the reek he could see the goblins dancing around and round in circle like people round a midsummer bonfire. Outside the ring of dancing warriors with the spears and axes stood the wolves at a respectful distance, watching and waiting. He could hear the goblins beating a horrible song.
That
was almost Gollum.
15 birds in 5 fir trees, the feathers were fanned in fiery breeze, but funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with the funny bird things? Roast 'em alive, stew 'em in a pot, fry 'em, boil 'em, and eat 'em hot.
Then they stopped and shouted,
Fly away, little birds, fly away if you can. Come down, little birds, or you'll get roasted in your nests. Oh, sing, little birds. Why don't you sing?
Go away, little boys,
shouted Gandalf in answer.
It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished.
He said it to make them angry, and to show them that he was not frightened of them. Though, of course, he was, wizard though he was. But they took no notice, and they went on singing.
Burn, burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch, a fizzling torch to light the night for our delight. Yeah, hey! Bake and toast 'em, fry 'em and roast 'em till beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skin crack, fat melts and bones black. Oh, and cinders lie beneath the sky, so dwarves will die and light the night for our delight. Yeah, hey! Yeah, Harry, hey! Yeah, hey!
And with that last,
yeah, hey!
The flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment, it spread to the others. The bark caught fire. The lower branches cracked. Then, Gandalf climbed to the top of his tree. The sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning as he got ready to spring down from on high right amongst the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he probably would have killed as many of them as came hurtling down like a lightning bolt. But he never leaped. Just at that moment, the Lord of all Eagles swept down from above, seized him in his talons, and he was gone. There was a howl of anger and surprise from the goblins. Ah! Loud cried the Lord of Eagles, ah! To whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came like huge black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth, the goblins yelled and stamped with rage, and flung their heavy spears in the air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles. The dark rush of their beating wings smote them to the floor or drove them far away. Their talons tore at goblin faces. Other birds flew to the treetops and seized the dwarves, who were scrambling up, now as far as they ever dared to go. Poor little Bilbo was nearly left behind again. He just managed to catch hold of Dory's legs, as Dory was borne off last of all, and up they went together above the tumult and the burning, Bilbo swinging in the air with his arms nearly breaking. Now, far below the goblins and the wolves were scattering far and wide into the woods. A few eagles were still circling and sweeping above the battleground. The flames about the trees sprang suddenly up above the highest branches. They went up in crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke. Bilbo had escaped just in time. Soon the light of the burning was faint below, a red twinkle on the black floor, and they were high up in the sky, rising all the time in strong, sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot that flight, clinging onto Dory's ankles. He moaned, "My arms! My arms!" But Dory groaned, "My legs! Oh, my poor legs!" At the best of times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer if he looked over the edge of quite a little cliff, and he had never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now when he looked down between his dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with the light of the moon on a hillside rock or a stream in the plains. The peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer. Then he imagined what would happen if he did not, and he felt sick. The flight ended not just in time for him, but just before his arms gave way. He loosed Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell into a rough platform of the Eagle's eyrie. There he lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at being saved from the fire, and fear lest he fall off the narrow place into the deep shadows on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head by the time, after the dreadful adventures of the last 3 days... Here's another long sentence. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head by this time, after the dreadful adventures of the last 3 days, with next to nothing to eat, and he found himself saying aloud, Now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it is suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork and put back on the shelf.
No, you don't, he heard Dory answering, because the bacon knows that it will get back in the pan sooner or later, and it has to be hoped we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks.
Oh, no, that's a bit like storks, forks, I mean, said Bilbo, sitting up and looking anxiously at the eagle who was perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he had been saying, and if the eagle would think it rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you are only the size of a hobbit, and are up to its eyrie at night. The eagle only sharpened its beak on a stone and trimmed his feathers and took no notice. Soon, another eagle flew up.
The Lord of Eagles bids you to bring your prisoners to the great shelf, he cried and was off again.
Was off again. Jeez, these sentences are getting weirder. The other seized Dory in his claws and flew away with him into the night, leaving Bilbo all alone. He had just strength to wonder what Messenger had meant by prisoners, and to begin to think of being torn up for supper like a rabbit, when his own turn came. The eagle came back, seized him in his talons by the back of his coat, and swooped off. This time, he flew only a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on a wide shelf of rock on the mountainside. There was no path down onto it save by flying, and no path down off of it except by jumping over a precipice. There, he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of the Eagles was also there, and speaking to Gandalf. It seemed that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to know one another slightly, and even be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had been off into the mountains, had once rendered service to the Eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, and not captives of the eagles. As Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf, he realized that at last they were going to escape really and truly from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans with the Great Eagle for carrying the dwarves and himself and Bilbo far away and settling them down well on their journey across the plains below. The Lord of Eagles would not take them anywhere near where the men live.
They would shoot at us with their great bows of yew, he said, for they would think we were after their sheep. And at times, they would be right. No! We are glad to cheat the goblins of their sport, and glad to repay our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for the dwarves of the southward plains.
Very well, said Gandalf. Take us where and as far as you will. We're already deeply obliged to you. But in the meantime, I am famished with hunger.
I am nearly dead of it, said Bilbo in a weak little voice that nobody heard.
That, can perhaps be mended,
said the Lord of all Eagles. Later on, you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of rock and the figures of dwarves round it cooking and making a fine roasting meal. The eagles had brought up dry boughs for fuel, and they had brought rabbits, hares, and small sheep. The dwarves managed all preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help. And anyway, he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook. Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going, since Oin and Gloin had lost their tinder boxes. Dwarves have never taken to matches just yet. So ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. Soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contentedly, though really he would have liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat toasted on sticks. He slept curled up on the hard rock more soundly than he ever had done in his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find, nor remember what it looked like. And that is the end of chapter 6. End of chapter 6. What a chunk of the book. Those 3 chapters, so much happen. We find the goblins. They fight the Great Goblin King. They meet Gollum. I mean, that's a huge event in and of itself. And then the wargs and the eagles. That's a huge chunk. That's a very active chunk of the book. Very exciting to read aloud, and fun to make up voices for everybody. It's fun and very stressful to have a conversation with yourself and have to remember who's who. Oh, cat, baby, where's baby? Piper, where'd you go? You want to say hi? We'll see. Kitty sighting? Where? I literally don't see her. Where is she? Did she walk away? I want her to say hi to chat. But I don't know if she's already scampered off to the kitchen. Let me look at chat here. She walked behind me? Yeah, she probably went to the kitchen. She's thinking she's gonna get some more extra special food, but she's good. She's all full up. Just realized Wolfe's Hop. Oh yeah, read that. Junji says that brings me as an Irish person so much joy. Junji, I don't know if I should be flattered or I should feel sorry for you that I'm probably doing a very poor Irish impression. Like, I know enough of the sound changes. You're probably going to be ashamed of me for this, but like, you know, there are certain when I'm trying to find certain voices, there are certain like trigger phrases that like help me find it, right? So like a fish helps with Gollum, and you know, when I start sense with Gandalf, sometimes I just have to say, oh, you find it there. And you know, things like Shrek, you know, like ogres have layers, donkey. Ogres have layers. Like, you know, like certain trigger phrases help me like ease into the accent. But it's oh no, they're after me Lucky Charms. That's what it is. I'm sorry. It just helps me find it. It helps me get right to where I need to be. I wish it was different. I really do. I really do wish it was. But it's not. They're after me Lucky Charms. What else? We are the watchers on the wall. That helps me find Jon Snow. I hear that. We are the watchers on the wall. And suddenly, I'm Thorin, you know?
Just, I don't know. Yes, that gin? I have no idea what I have no idea what you mean, Ailing, but I will take the drink, Dylan. Oh, Jon Snow, yeah. It's no, I just didn't understand what you were saying, but yeah, no, Jon Snow is one of my, I love doing that. I just love the whole northern, oh my, ooh. It's just there's so much to it. What other ones? I'm trying to think if there's any other like fun ones.
If you ever want to talk like, this guy, you just have to think, 1940s, it's the talkies, it's the pictures. Hey, hi the ho there,
Like that one's easy to jump into. Which I haven't brought out, but maybe it'll be a character, who knows.
The sort of, I haven't had much use for like a British RP yet. Sort of like a hoity-toity, nobleman. We haven't needed it. The Lord of Eagles sort of got into that area, but was not quite full force, if you will. And in the same bent, you can do a mid-Atlantic, sort of an old 19, when suddenly the pictures, they had color, and now we're not quite British, but we're not quite American. We're mid-Atlantic.
You find all those different sound changes. I'm trying to think. Do I know any other good ones? Now I need you to use that voice sometime. Which one? I'll find a way to use them all.
Sometimes you can. I can take my way through French accent. It is not the best. Ma petite chauffeur, it's alright. It will pass for certain exchanges. Will not do long term.
German's hard for me
because like German, it's sort of like it has the very same sound changes as French, but it is harsher and it is sharper. And so
I want to I'll start German. And then I'll slide into French because I want to be liquid, I want to say I want to but it's not, it's something to be done, it's very sharp. What else? I'm just now I'm just riffing on things.
They say do svidaniya, comrade. Yes, you do. A sort of a Balkan, Slavic, Russian. It could be any. They are from. They're from, my people are Serbian, so that you could talk like that. You could say that is right.
If you try to be angry the whole time during German, it'll be harder to slip into French. Yeah, that's true. If you have that, harsh affectation. But then every character has to sound like they're angry all the time, which, could work for certain characters. Yeah, if you want to have a softer moment, it might be a little difficult to muster. But yeah, those are just a bunch of accents that I've picked up over the years. Some of them I learned by ear. Most of them I would say I learned by ear. But I also, when I was at school, they taught us IPA, which is, if you're interested in voiceover and sound changes and things like that, it's a very cool thing to learn, because it's an alphabet. It's a system of symbols, which the symbols all mean different inflections, different sound changes, right? So you could write a script, and then you could rewrite the script with the symbols over the letters, right? And those symbols will tell you and let you know what sound changes have to happen, right? So that lets you know, certain symbol, when you're speaking British, some of the letters will let you know that it is an R sound, it's R, or it's, what's the other one? Ask, or ask, it'll let you know which one is ask, or ever, those sort of things. Or liquid U, hue, tune. Does this perhaps need a tune? Those symbols will let you know that. So it's a fun thing to learn. But
I would say most of the time I always learned it by ear, and then having the symbols on the page help me like reinforce it. I don't have the luxury of IPAing my entire Hobbit 75th Anniversary Edition book. So I just have to do it in the moment. But it's still fun. It's still a great time. But anyways, we had ourselves a time tonight, did we not, friends? Huge chunk of the book. Y'all are being you're being so merciful with me.
Oh, it's time to stretches. Yes, you do the lunch. Ooh, you do the lunch. Ooh, you do pencils.
I'm going crazy. I'm going nuts. Junji hitting us with the beans. I need to update beans. Beans look so much different now. People have mutated beans beyond all recognition. Oh, all the values on beans are changed too now. You can do things with them a lot cheaper, I think, in terms of points and in bits, if you're bored. I tuned those around. So you should be able to have more fun with beans now, if you want. There to hang out with you. Oh my god. This leg feels like it wants to pop off.
There, this lunches. My precious lunches.
Yeah, feed that dragon a carrot. Hell yeah, that's a hungry dragon. Also, did no one notice that I made the background green for tonight to represent our green book? It's called aesthetic, okay? It's called curation. I'm curating content. But wow, what a day. What a time. What a life we've lived today. That's a lot of adventure. That's a lot of story. But that being said, I have to go pick up contacts in the morning and call my... Whoa! Yes. Feed the dragon. Feed the dragon. Listen, feeding the dragon makes him stronger. And then next time Beans fights somebody, I don't know what... I mean, we already have a crown. I don't know if we get more crowns. And then if you mutate Beans, I'm going to use mutate as opposed to the other word that the app uses, which is... people have laughed at before. I think it makes them makes the variants more different. More? I don't know. But whoa! Yo, this ailing. Yeah, that word. There's too many monster lovers in this chat. We can't be throwing around that word all willy-nilly when it comes to dragons. Wow, yo. Beans is eating well tonight. Beans was famished. Bonk ailing. yeah, you gotta go to a particular type of jail, I think, ailing. I know that meme. Bonk bonk bonk. Don't cry. Listen, the stream, we love our monsters here. We love them. But redeem time out. Yeah. You think about what you've done, Ailing. You think about what you've done. Like your orchids start walking by themselves. But anyways, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I know this is definitely, it's not our normal stuff. You know, I started this channel with the intent of being role-playing games, but, you know, whoa, more Beans feeds. Yo. Plus 10 HP every time that Beans gets fed? Beans is going to be unstoppable. Beans is going to have the most HP. Beans is a tank. Beans plays Barbarian. Beans rolls Barbarian. Beans on steroids. Super jacked Beans. These beans are jacked.
Cookies.
Yeah, you got options. Yeah, options. But yeah, I know this content is definitely different than what we normally do. The channel's obviously, its origin point is fantasy, role-playing games, but, I think that can spread to all manner of fantasy things that we enjoy and that have inspired D&D for sure, So I hope, I know some people were really looking forward to this stream, and I'm glad. So we'll definitely be bringing it back. We'll definitely be finishing all of, I'm such a vain creature. As soon as I take the stream off performance mode, I can't not look at myself. We're definitely going to finish The Hobbit. We're definitely going to finish the book. And then people were talking about maybe reading Lord of the Rings, which that would be interesting. This is like so whimsical and there's scary parts, but it's like so whimsical. But doing the Lord of the Rings would be a much more dramatic turn. But I'm down if people are down. Also, I was thinking about maybe in the spirit of like doing more fantasy things that I like, I was also thinking about doing a Magic the Gathering stream. I'm thinking about it. Because I'm not good at it, but I really like it, and I want to be good at it. So maybe playing it online, and like we'll have people, and having people make fun of me for not being good at it will help me hone my skills. And it's also another fantasy thing, and it's a game that I like. It's an idea. 20th says, all fun and games till Wolf reads the Silmarillion. Yeah, we'll sit here for like a 7-hour stream while I describe a tree branch. We'll all listen to me essentially reading one passage, which is the length of an audiobook about a leaf. It'll be fun. It'll be a great time. I'm down for all 7 hours of tree branches. All right, hey, Junji, if you're putting up the watch hours, if you log 7 hours of watch time on that video, I will make it. You'll be the only one, but I will make it. Gollum workouts. Yeah, I'll make that when I get our Patreon all fixed up. That'll be one of the monthly a free Gollum workout video for all subscribers. Need to get yourself in shape?
The process will help you. Moves the legs, chases the hobbits.
Yeah, honestly, if Gollum didn't skip leg day, probably could have caught Bilbo. It's his own damn fault, They always tell you, don't skip leg day. You're gonna sit here and build a weird paddle boat in the middle of your underground lake and not make sure that your calves and your hammies and your quads are prepared to sail you across the waves in pursuit of your prey? Played yourself, homie. Sorry. While you were eating potatoes, Gollum was training. It's like a training montage of Gollum just like like running up the steps of from Rocky. What tangent am I on? What am I saying? What am I doing? But no, thank you so much. As always, your time and energy is so appreciated here. I'm glad I was able to bring this next iteration of the Hobbit stream because I know people were excited for it, and it makes me excited for it. Like, I'm happy to read the Hobbit again and get back into the swing of things and do some voice acting. That's another fun reason to read too, is that I get to do some extra. I get to make voices for people, and I like doing that. But thank you for joining us tonight. I am Wolfe Scott, your host and Dungeon Master. You're watching Level 1. What is Level 1? Tonight, it was a Hobbit book reading, but normally it is a role-playing game stream about tabletop games and video games that are RPGs, TTRPGs. We do small indie projects, things like Firelight solo games, like Cypher System, and bigger name group games like D&D, so you got a lot to see. Please follow us on all the platforms. YouTube will have all of our episodes that have already ran, so if you want to catch the first session of this or another thing that we've run, that's where to go. And make sure to join the Disco. It's where we chat, where we meme, where I'm sure there'll be screen grabs of me doing something unhinged as Gollum posted very shortly.
And it's also where we're going to be playing some D&D very soon. I know I keep saying it, but I'm so close to like getting the final touches on it, and I'm really excited. It's set in Mira. It's set in the homebrewed world. The factions that are going to be in Mira are there. I'm excited. I can't wait to unveil to everyone. It's going to be fun. So if you want to play some D&D with the community, that is where to go. Big shout out to StreamLabs and StreamSpell for all of the cool visual effects that you see on the stream tonight. Link down below, affiliate link if you want to help yourself out and help us out as well. And a big shout out to Tabletop Audio, which has supplied our music tonight. You know, it's funny. I did also prepare. Well, actually, I prepared like another song to play tonight, like for an action scene. But really, I mean, it could have worked for maybe a couple things, but because we were like, it was more like creepy. It was more horror, you know, like creeping in the caverns and stuff. So I just let it run with the standard fantasy, you know, tribal music. But yeah, big shout out to Tabletop Audio for that as well. And as always, thank y'all again. I'm gonna be away. Let me take a look at my life. I'm visiting my sister out of state, I should say. And I'll be gone from the 29th until next Wednesday. So we won't have any streams next week. I'm sorry. I won't see you. I love you all. But I'll be back on my normal bag. The next week, we'll be back to our normal run times. And yeah, we can get an idea of what people want to see. I'll double check with the gang to see if we can actually do a D&D session. It's been too long. But with that being said, I hope you all have an excellent week. I hope you had a wonderful night. I hope you enjoyed this. And I can't wait to bring back more Hobbit or more D&D or more whatever we're bringing you next time around, and hope to see you there. So with that, have an excellent rest of your night. Beans, Gollum, and I, we all say good night, and we'll see you next time. So be easy, be good, and peace.